My name is Elijah, a 37-year-old software engineer. For the past 10 years, I've been married to Mia, 34, a freelance designer who works remotely. Our life together seemed ideal. On the surface, we had no children, just the two of us and our routines. I traveled frequently for work, and Mia thrived in her creative bubble, often filling the home with her vibrant energy and creations. At least, that's what I told myself. Lately, though, something had shifted. Mia's work-from-home schedule had turned into erratic hours and mysterious creative blocks that required her to step away from her desk for hours on end. Her usual updates about projects she was working on had dried up, replaced with vague mentions of stress and needing inspiration. Then there was the new neighbor, Benjamin, 38, and his family. His wife, Emma, and their young daughter, Lily, had moved into the house next door 6 months ago. He seemed the typical suburban dad, with a quick smile and casual charm. At first, I didn't think much of him, but then I started noticing the subtle changes. Mia seemed unusually interested in their family, dropping off baked goods or inviting Emma over for coffee. It all felt innocent, but then her behavior toward Benjamin changed. I couldn't ignore the tension when we crossed paths at the mailbox or exchanged casual greetings at neighborhood barbecues. Benjamin's presence made me uneasy in ways I couldn't explain. Still, I buried my suspicions, brushing them off as paranoia fueled by my frequent absences. It wasn't until a recent business trip that the cracks in our marriage became impossible to ignore. Before leaving, I asked Mia about her plans for the weekend. She avoided my gaze, muttering something about catching up on a project. The next evening, stuck in a hotel room during a layover, I decided to FaceTime her. She didn't answer. My text messages went unread for hours. Finally, she responded with a curt explanation. She'd fallen asleep early. I wanted to believe her, but my gut told me otherwise. When I returned home, the house felt different. Mia's warmth, usually so palpable, had been replaced by a distant air. I found myself noticing the small details I'd ignored before. Her phone always face down, hush phone calls she claimed were work-related, and the way she smiled at me like I was a guest in my own home. The final straw came one afternoon when I went to the garage to grab something from my toolbox and found an unfamiliar set of men's gloves resting on top of the pile. They were too large to be mine. I held them up, staring at them like they were an alien artifact. Who did they belong to? The question burned in my mind as I turned the gloves over, looking for a clue. That's when I saw the faint smudge of paint on the cuff, a color I recognized from the newly painted fence in Benjamin's backyard. Something inside me snapped. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. I needed proof. The gloves were just the beginning. The gloves haunted me, as if they were whispering secrets I wasn't meant to know. They became the catalyst for a storm of doubt I could no longer keep at bay. Every detail of Mia's behavior took on a new significance. Every interaction was colored with a sinister hue. I began seeing things not as her husband, but as an investigator piecing together a mystery that had been hiding in plain sight. First, it was the scent of her perfume lingering stronger than usual. Mia had always taken pride in her appearance, but lately, her efforts had transformed from casual elegance to something more deliberate. Her hair was always perfectly done, her clothes subtly suggestive, her lips painted with the kind of shade she used to wear on our date nights. "I just want to feel good about myself," she'd said once when I complimented her. At the time, I believed her. Now I wondered who she was really dressing for. Then, there were her long walks. Mia often claimed she needed to step away from her desk to clear her head or find inspiration. It seemed reasonable enough. But on more than one occasion, I returned home earlier than expected to find her slipping out of the house. Her expression always seemed slightly startled when she saw me, like a deer caught mid-stride. When I asked where she'd been, her answers came quickly, too quickly. "Oh, just the park," she'd say, brushing past me. I wanted to press her, but felt the weight of her evasiveness in my chest. The biggest change, though, was her phone. It was glued to her hand like a lifeline, but she never let me see the screen. Once, while we were having dinner, a notification buzzed, and she tilted the screen away from my view, silencing it with a nervous flick of her thumb. My gut twisted as I noticed her quick glance at me, a flash of guilt in her eyes she tried to mask with a smile. Just work, she murmured, but I wasn't convinced. One night, unable to sleep, I got up for water and noticed the faint glow of her phone illuminating her face. She was lying on her side, her back turned toward me, scrolling through something with a quiet intensity. My footsteps were soft on the carpet, but she heard me. The way she locked her phone and pretended to be asleep in an instant made my pulse race. I stood there in the dark, staring at her motionless figure, wondering how many lies she was cradling in her hands. The next day, I decided to test the waters. "Hey, can I borrow your phone?" I asked casually, pretending I'd misplaced mine. Her reaction was telling, a flicker of panic before she laughed and said, "What do you need it for?" When I told her I wanted to check something online, she hesitated before handing it to me. I could feel her eyes burning into me as I pretended to browse. Her tension was palpable, a coiled spring ready to snap. I handed it back without a word, but her paranoia confirmed what I feared. She was hiding something. The final nail came when I spotted the car. It was parked a few houses down, one of those sleek, dark SUVs that screamed luxury. At first, I thought it belonged to one of the other neighbors, but then I noticed something strange. Every time Mia went out for her so-called inspiration walks, the car was there. It was too much to be a coincidence. One day, as I watched her leave, the SUV started up and pulled away, trailing behind her at a distance. I didn't follow them that day, though every fiber of my being screamed at me to do so. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. I felt like a man watching a slow-motion train wreck, powerless to stop it. My mind raced with possibilities, each more painful than the last. Was she meeting someone? Was Benjamin behind the wheel of that car? The questions consumed me. Each moment with Mia became a performance. I studied her like a character in a play, trying to decipher her motivations and secrets from the smallest gestures. Every time she touched my arm, I wondered if it was out of love or guilt. Every laugh felt hollow, every kiss mechanical. She was still Mia, but now there was a version of her I didn't recognize, a version I feared had existed all along. I knew I couldn't let this fester any longer. My suspicions were eating me alive, and I needed answers. The gloves, the walks, the phone, the car. Each was a thread, and I was determined to unravel the truth. For the first time in weeks, things seemed normal. Mia's behavior had softened, almost as if she sensed my unease and was trying to smooth over the rough edges. Her phone, while still ever-present, wasn't as guarded. She was more affectionate, engaging me in conversations about my work and even joking about plans for a weekend getaway. It felt like a tentative return to the rhythm we once shared, and though a part of me remained skeptical, I found myself wanting to believe her. The gloves and the SUV were still fresh in my mind, but Mia's apparent transparency made me question my instincts. Perhaps I'd been too paranoid, misinterpreting the signs. Maybe she really was just going through a creative block, and my absence had amplified the distance between us. By the time the weekend arrived, I felt almost foolish for doubting her. But life, as it turns out, has a cruel sense of timing. Late Sunday evening, as we were winding down after dinner, my boss called with an urgent request. A major client was facing a technical meltdown, and I was the only one who could sort it out. My protests about the short notice fell on deaf ears. They needed me their first thing Monday morning. Mia seemed genuinely disappointed as I packed my suitcase, leaning against the bedroom doorframe with a glass of wine in hand. "Another trip?" she asked, her voice laced with feigned lightness. "When will they give you a break?" I shrugged, zipping up the bag. "Hopefully this won't take long. Just a couple of days." "Well," she said, setting her glass down and walking over to kiss me. "Come back to me quickly, okay?" Her words hung in the air long after I left. I couldn't shake the feeling that her concern felt rehearsed, like a line delivered in a play she didn't fully believe in. The flight was uneventful, and by Monday afternoon, I was neck-deep in client meetings, troubleshooting issues, and reassuring executives. For a brief moment, the whirlwind of work distracted me from my mounting doubts about Mia. I even convinced myself to stop overanalyzing every interaction. That is, until my phone rang Tuesday evening. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway, thinking it might be related to the project. What I heard on the other end made my heart drop. Elijah? It's Emma, Benjamin's wife. Her voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of unease. We'd only spoken a handful of times at neighborhood gatherings, but her tone now was far from the casual small talk I remembered. "Hi, Emma," I said, suddenly wary. "Is everything okay?" There was a pause, the kind that stretched too long. Finally, she spoke, her words deliberate and measured. "I wasn't sure if I should call, but I saw Benjamin today. He was at a cafe downtown." "That doesn't sound unusual," I replied cautiously, though my pulse quickened. "He wasn't alone, Elijah," she continued. "He was with Mia." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words hit me like a sledgehammer, each one landing with a dull, numbing force. Mia, in a cafe, with Benjamin. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Yes," Emma replied firmly. I didn't approach them. I didn't want to cause a scene, but they were sitting together, talking, and it didn't look like a casual chat between neighbors. The room around me seemed to tilt, the air thick and suffocating. I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing to make sense of what she was saying. "Did they see you?" "I don't think so," she said. "I left as soon as I recognized her. I thought you might know something about it, but now I'm guessing you didn't." "No," I said flatly. "I didn't." Emma sighed on the other end, the sound heavy with frustration. "I don't know what's going on, Elijah. I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I thought you deserved to know." "Thank you," I managed to say, though my voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. After we hung up, I sat motionless for what felt like hours. The image of Mia and Benjamin together looped endlessly in my mind, each iteration bringing a fresh wave of anger and betrayal. How long had this been going on? Had Mia lied when she promised to stay home? And why Benjamin, of all people? 1,000 questions clawed at my mind, but one thing was clear. The thread I'd been pulling had unraveled further than I'd ever imagined. My suspicions weren't paranoia. They were the truth, staring me in the face with cruel clarity. The next step was inevitable. I had to confront her, but not before I had every piece of the puzzle in place. This time, I wouldn't let her sidestep the truth. The moment Emma hung up, I knew I couldn't wait. I rescheduled my remaining meetings, offering vague excuses about a family emergency, and booked the first flight back home. Every second spent away felt unbearable, the truth gnawing at me with an intensity that made it impossible to focus on anything else. By the time I landed, I was a tightly wound coil, ready to snap. The drive from the airport blurred in my mind, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. When I finally pulled into the driveway, Mia's car was conspicuously absent. For once, her inspiration walks worked in my favor. The silence of the house was deafening as I stepped inside, the weight of my purpose heavy on my chest. If I wanted answers, I needed to look for them. The gloves and the SUV weren't enough. I needed proof so undeniable that Mia couldn't lie her way out of it. I started with her phone. Normally, it was glued to her side, but today her absence meant I could search without interruption. Her desk in the living room was an organized chaos of sketchbooks, pens, and charging cables. I found her laptop tucked neatly into her bag, but her phone wasn't there. My stomach sank. She'd probably taken it with her. I turned my attention to her laptop. It was locked, of course, but I knew Mia's passwords well enough to guess. After a few tries, the desktop sprang to life. My hands trembled as I navigated through her files and browser history, hoping to find something, anything, that would confirm what Emma had told me. But her laptop was clean. Too clean. It was as if she'd anticipated someone might look. My frustration grew as I searched, every empty folder and deleted browsing history feeling like another taunt. Then, I remembered her tablet. Mia often used it to sketch designs, and it sat on the coffee table in plain sight. This time, I had better luck. The tablet wasn't locked, and I quickly opened WhatsApp. The messages were damning. There, in a chat labeled with nothing more than a single B, were dozens of messages exchanged between Mia and Benjamin. My heart pounded as I scrolled through their conversation. It started innocently enough, but the tone shifted over time. Compliments became flirtations. Flirtations became confessions. And then the photos. I felt my throat tighten as I opened them. My worst fears realized. The images were intimate, unmistakable. Mia smiling in lingerie I'd never seen before. A selfie of Benjamin with a satisfied smirk, shirtless in what looked like my backyard. The timestamps aligned perfectly with times I'd been away on business trips. I didn't stop there. I searched through other apps, Signal, Instagram, even her emails. Each platform held more of the same, messages and photos that painted a clear picture of betrayal. Their words were dripping with intimacy and the excitement of stolen moments. My hands shook as I read them, my rage barely contained. With my chest tightening, I moved to search the house itself. If Benjamin had been here as often as the messages suggested, he might have left something behind. I started in the bedroom, my eyes scanning every corner for anything out of place. The sheets on our bed had been changed recently, and the faint scent of cologne, definitely not mine, lingered in the air. In the bathroom, I found a shaving kit tucked behind the sink. At first, I thought it might have been a mistake, but the razor and aftershave weren't familiar. My stomach churned as I stared at it. He'd made himself comfortable enough to leave personal items in my home. I moved to the living room, pulling cushions off the couch, searching through drawers, and rifling through anything that might hold a clue. In one of the side tables, I found a half-empty bottle of whiskey. It wasn't the brand Mia or I drank, and I had no doubt who it belonged to. The final blow came in the laundry room. Buried at the bottom of the hamper was a crumpled men's t-shirt that reeked of sweat and cologne. It wasn't mine, and the size was too large to belong to Mia. I held it in my hands, the weight of it crushing. By the time I was done, I'd gathered enough evidence to shatter the illusion of our marriage entirely. Messages, photos, clothes, and items left behind like breadcrumbs leading directly to Benjamin. There was no denying what had happened. No way Mia could explain this away. I sat down at the kitchen table, the collected proof spread out in front of me. My breathing was ragged, my thoughts a whirlwind of fury and heartbreak. All that remained now was to wait for her to come home. And when she did, she wouldn't just face my anger. She would face the undeniable truth of her betrayal, laid bare for her to see. When Mia returned home that evening, I was ready. I'd stashed the evidence back in its hiding places and restored the house to its usual state of organized normalcy. I greeted her at the door with a casual smile and a kiss on the cheek, suppressing the bile that rose in my throat as she returned the gesture. If she sensed anything was wrong, she didn't show it. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my tone light as she set her bag down and slipped out of her shoes. "Productive," she replied, her smile practiced. "I managed to finally get some work done on that new design." Her lie was so smooth that, for a fleeting moment, I marveled at how effortlessly she could deceive me. But the knowledge of what I'd uncovered fueled my resolve. I wouldn't confront her yet. Not here. Not now. I wanted to destroy her carefully constructed facade in a way she couldn't ignore or deflect. The idea came to me late that night, as I lay awake while Mia slept soundly beside me. The family barbecue. It was an annual tradition in the neighborhood, hosted at our house, with everyone gathering in the backyard for drinks, laughter, and food. Benjamin and Emma were, of course, already on the guest list. The plan took shape in my mind like a jigsaw puzzle snapping into place. This wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be a reckoning, a public unmasking of their betrayal in front of their closest friends and loved ones. I would bide my time, play my part, and make sure every detail was perfect. Over the next few days, I put my plan into motion. I went about my routine as if nothing had changed, engaging Mia in casual conversations, discussing mundane details about the barbecue, and even helping her finalize the guest list. She seemed more relaxed than usual, even cheerful, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was because she thought she'd gotten away with everything. I printed the photos and messages I'd uncovered, sealing them in plain envelopes labeled with names: Benjamin, Mia, Emma. Each envelope was tailored, containing the pieces of evidence that would strike the most devastating blows. For Benjamin, intimate photos of Mia and him together, along with the explicit texts he'd sent. For Mia, screenshots of her messages to Benjamin, and the details of her deceit. And for Emma, a mix of everything, so there would be no doubt about her husband's betrayal. I also bought a new Bluetooth speaker, small enough to hide, but powerful enough to project sound across the entire backyard. Using an old phone, I recorded an audio montage of the most incriminating messages between Mia and Benjamin. Their flirtations, confessions, and plans to meet were strung together into a damning symphony of their affair. The morning of the barbecue, I set everything up with meticulous precision. The envelopes were hidden in the side table by the patio, ready to be handed out at the climax of the event. The Bluetooth speaker was tucked behind a potted plant near the grill, connected to the phone and prepped for playback. I tested it twice, ensuring the audio would be crystal clear. Mia, oblivious to my preparations, busied herself arranging decorations and preparing side dishes. She hummed to herself as she worked, a picture of domestic contentment that might have fooled me once. Not anymore. By the time our guests arrived, I was the perfect host. I greeted everyone warmly, offered drinks, and made small talk as I worked the grill. Benjamin and Emma arrived together, and I felt a pang of pity for Emma as she smiled at me, blissfully unaware of what her husband had been doing behind her back. Benjamin, on the other hand, seemed at ease, too at ease. He clapped me on the back with that same confident grin that had always unnerved me. "Smells amazing, Elijah," he said. "You've outdone yourself." "Thanks, man," I replied, evenly, my smile tight. "Glad you could make it." I watched him throughout the evening, noting how his gaze lingered on Mia when he thought no one was looking. She was equally complicit, throwing him subtle glances and smiles that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Their audacity only strengthened my resolve. When the sun began to set, casting the backyard in a warm, golden glow, I decided it was time. I raised my glass, calling for everyone's attention. The chatter quieted as our guests turned to face me, their expressions expectant. "First, I want to thank you all for coming," I began, keeping my tone friendly. "It's always a pleasure to host this barbecue and spend time with such wonderful neighbors and friends." There were murmurs of agreement and a smattering of applause. I glanced at Mia, who smiled at me warmly, completely unaware of what was about to happen. "But before we wrap up, I have something I'd like to share," I continued, reaching into the side table and pulling out the envelopes. My heart pounded as I handed them to their intended recipients. "This is for Benjamin, Mia, and Emma. I think it's something you'll find enlightening." The atmosphere shifted immediately. Benjamin's smile faltered, his hand tightening around the envelope as he exchanged a nervous glance with Mia. Emma frowned, her confusion evident as she began to open hers. And to give everyone a bit of context, I added, stepping back toward the grill and tapping my phone, "I've prepared a little audio presentation." The first message played, Benjamin's voice unmistakable as he murmured something flirtatious to Mia. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the messages escalated, each one more damning than the last. Mia's face turned ashen, her eyes wide with shock as the truth unfolded around her. Benjamin looked like he wanted to bolt, but was frozen in place. Emma, clutching her envelope, stared at Benjamin in horror. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "It's the truth," I said calmly, my gaze fixed on Mia. "About what's been happening while I've been away." Mia tried to speak, but no words came out. Her betrayal was laid bare, and there was no escape. Benjamin's charm evaporated as he stammered, "Elijah, Save it." I cut him off, my voice cold. "You've said enough." The party unraveled into chaos as the guests reacted, some shouting, others leaving in stunned silence. Emma stormed off, dragging Benjamin with her, while Mia crumpled into a chair, her head in her hands. I stood amidst the wreckage, a strange sense of satisfaction settling over me. The lies were over, and the truth was finally out. The aftermath of the barbecue was a storm that none of us could escape. As the last of the guests hurriedly departed, the backyard felt like a battlefield, littered with the emotional wreckage of my carefully orchestrated revenge. The tension was suffocating, and the weight of exposed secrets hung in the air like smoke. Mia sat motionless on the patio, her face pale and streaked with tears. She hadn't spoken since the audio played, her hands trembling as they clutched the now crumpled envelope. I stood a few feet away, leaning against the grill, watching her with a detached calm I hadn't expected to feel. The anger that had fueled me for weeks was gone, replaced by an icy resolve. "You've destroyed us," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. "No," I replied, my tone flat. "You did that. I just made sure everyone saw it." Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face twisted with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything, Elijah. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake." I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and cutting. "A mistake is forgetting to turn off the coffee pot, Mia. What you did was a choice, repeatedly. You don't get to rewrite it now that the world knows." She flinched, her defenses crumbling again. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she murmured, but her words felt hollow. "Too late for that," I said, turning away from her. "Pack your things, Mia. By the end of the week, I want you out of this house." She started to protest, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "I don't want to hear it. If you need to cry to someone, call Benjamin. Oh, wait. He might have his own mess to deal with now." The fallout from the barbecue rippled through the neighborhood like wildfire. Emma filed for divorce the very next day, and Benjamin moved out of their home within the week. Rumors swirled, fueled by whispers of what had happened that evening. Neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed Mia's car, and her once friendly chats at the mailbox became distant nods. Emma, to her credit, reached out to me a few weeks later. We met for coffee, both of us still reeling from the betrayal, but finding a strange solidarity in our shared pain. "Thank you," she said softly, her hands wrapped around her mug, "for letting me see the truth. I wish it hadn't come to this, but I'm glad I know." I nodded, grateful for her understanding, but still haunted by the scars left behind. "I wish I didn't have to do it that way," I admitted, but I didn't see another choice. She reached across the table, her touch warm and steady. "Sometimes the truth needs to come out, no matter how ugly it is." As for Mia, she left the house at the end of the week, just as I demanded. I watched her load the last of her belongings into her car, her movements slow and reluctant. She paused at the driver's side door, turning to face me one last time. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I am." I didn't reply. I simply nodded, my expression unreadable, and turned back toward the house. The sound of her car pulling away was both a relief and a reminder of what had been lost. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding. The house felt empty without her, but it also felt lighter, free from the weight of deceit. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into work, and even took up hiking, a way to clear my mind and find some semblance of peace. It wasn't easy. The nights were the hardest, filled with memories of what we once were and the painful realization of what we'd become. But each day brought a little more clarity, a little more strength. Mia and Benjamin's affair became a cautionary tale in our neighborhood, a story whispered behind closed doors but never addressed directly. Emma sold her house and moved closer to her family, leaving the neighborhood and the memories of Benjamin behind. As for me, I stayed, not out of spite, but because I refused to let their betrayal drive me away from the life I'd built. This was my home, and I wouldn't let it be defined by their lies. The truth had been exposed, the damage done, but in its wake, I found something unexpected: freedom. Freedom from the doubts, the lies, and the constant second-guessing. It wasn't the ending I'd envisioned, but it was the one I needed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again.